Welcome you all to Pan-African Studies 101, the introductory course. I am Professor Ray, and I'm so happy that you all are here. So with this being our second class period together, I just wanted to go ahead and jump into the material of Pan-Africanism. And when we say Pan-Africanism, most of the time people are like, what is that? Does it have to do with just Africans? Are African Americans considered to be under Pan-Africanism? That's what we're going to clear up today. We're going to define some of its origins, some of the political, cultural, economic standpoints, some of these significant movements that have occurred over the years and still are occurring, and some of the ways we can continue to enforce and spread the word of what Pan-Africanism is and how people of not African descent can be allies to Pan-Africanism. So let's jump into the material. So we're going to go ahead and define Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism is an ideology or an idea and a movement that those who are of African descent have solidarity or unity among the population. And Pan-Africanism came to be due to the African diaspora. The African diaspora came to be because of the transatlantic slave trade. Let me slow down a little bit because I threw three terms at you. Pan-Africanism, which is an ideology and a movement of solidarity of African American people in Africa and across the globe. And the part that is across the globe brings in the African diaspora, but we couldn't have the African diaspora without the transatlantic slave trade. So let's go ahead and define the transatlantic slave trade. Most of us grew up knowing and learning about this. So the transatlantic slave trade occurred between the 16th and the 19th century, aka 300 years. And this was an important contributing factor to the African diaspora because people of African descent were taken from Africa, transported along the water, and placed in the Americas, parts of Europe, and the Caribbean, right? And this forceful movement across the water and placement into the new world or the new lands is what the African diaspora is. Those that are outside of Africa living. And this is a disbursement that occurred over several centuries into areas such as the United States, Brazil, the Caribbean, Canada, Europe, Latin America, and so on. Now with this, we then move on to post-colonial migration. And this migration allows the diaspora to be voluntary instead of forceful like the transatlantic slave trade. And now, today, we see how the African diaspora continues to grow as people migrate for a variety of reasons, including education, employment, and asylum from conflict in their homeland. Next, we're going to move on to a man who is dubbed with organizing the first PAN conference. PAN is short for Pan-Africanism, Pan-African Conference in London. And his name is Henry Sylvester Williams, who was a Trinidadian lawyer and activist. And with him forming the first Pan-African Conference in London in 1900 exactly, this brought African and Afro-descendant leaders to discuss what is next for the African people. And this conference laid the groundwork for future Pan-African conferences and subsequent leaders, such as Marcus Garvey, such as W.E.B. Du Bois, such as Kwame, and so many other historical factors that are significant to Pan-African studies. Now, another element of the early 1900s or the 1930s to be exact is going to be the Negritude movement, which has a profound impact on the African culture and history because of Pan-Africanism. And the Negritude movement emerged in the 1930s among the French-speaking African and Caribbean writers. And this was a literary and ideological movement that emerged in the 1930s and lasted through the 1950s. And this movement sought to reclaim and assert pride in the African and Afro-Caribbean culture, values, and history that has been marginalized and colonized. Basically, the Niggitude movement wanted to get back to the roots, get back to the history of the people, get back to the culture, reclaim ourselves in this new land, which we were stripped from our languages, our culture, our customs, our traditional ways of eating, cooking, marriage, hairstyles, clothing, hierarchy within the family, and so many other factors were stripped from us. So this was one of the first recalls of, let's get back to us. Let's get back to our roots and reestablish our foundation that was taken away from us due to the transatlantic slave trade, due to the forceful enslavement for many centuries, which is then, as we all know, followed by segregation, followed by Jim Crow, followed by discrimination, and so many other factors that are so deeply embedded into today's political and economical system. So after this, we're going to highlight some of the key organizations that emerged due to Henry Sylvester Williams and calling of the first Pan-African Conference, and due to the Niggitude movement from the 1930s to the 1950s. And this was the Organization of African Unity, also known as the OAU for its abbreviation, and this was formed in May of 1963. And this was where individual leaders were represented by a collective 32 independent African states. And this was a significant milestone in the post-colonial history of Africa and represents a collective effort among African leaders to promote unity, solidarity, and cooperation among the newly independent nations. And one of its primary goals, as we are going to be able to see and highlight with most of these movements, most of the leaders that come to emerge, is the unity and the solidarity and just the integrity and the collection of the African people wanting to regain a sense of, who are we? This is what we are. This is who we are. This is our custom. This is our culture. So oftentimes, most of the movements, the foundation or the reasoning or the purpose or the goal or the objective or the intent of many of the movements across history is, and even today, is going to be the unity and solidarity and the common ground and the uplifting of the culture, traditions, and values and things of that nature of the African people. That's literally the main objective of Pan-Africanism, of the African diaspora, of the OAU, of the NAACP, which is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, of the NCC, which is the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, of Martin Luther King's movement, of Malcolm X movement, of Marcus Garvey, of W.E.B. Du Bois, of Kwame, of so many other leaders, of Gandhi. Just unity, just being treated correctly, just being able to be treated and seen as a human and have stake and value and say so in so many realms of what encompasses a person and their ability to live instead of just survive. So Pan-Africanism, in conclusion, is a dynamic and multifaceted movement that has significantly shaped and is still shaping historical, cultural, political, and community among African descendants, whether that be in the homeland of Africa or whether that be in the new world or America, United States, Canada, and so on and so forth. And I want you to really understand that this movement is crucial for appreciating the shared history among struggles of African descendant people and for envisioning a future rooted in solidarity and mutual support, whether that be from those of African descent or from allies that would like to support those of African descent. So thank you for paying attention today. I look forward to what you decided to pull from today's lesson, and I will see you next class. Have a good one.